In this video, we will be tasting and comparing our previous batch with our newly arrived batch of summer 2021 harvest High Mountain Concubine Oolong tea from the Shanlinshi High Mountain Oolong tea growing region. So we're here today tasting two batches of a unique type of Taiwan tea, namely Concubine Oolong tea. The name Concubine was coined initially by the Lugu Farmers Association following the 9/21 earthquake, when many farms had been cut off access to because of the roads had been blocked, and a lot of the crops of tea were bitten by, or bug bitten as the commonly referred name is, namely the green leafhopper, a type of very small flying insect that looks like an aphid, likes to feed on the new growth of tea leaves, and it causes an immune system in the tea plants to produce an aromatic compound that attracts another insect, which is a predator of the green leafhopper. So, since then, this tea has been more officially promoted, you might say. It has always existed, especially prior to modern tea farming methods. Back in the day, as we know, Oriental Beauty has been around for over 100 years. That is the original bug-bitten tea in terms of a name that was given to this type of tea. In Taiwanese, it's usually just called enate, which can be translated as bug spittle tea. It appears to me to be a local form of humor that people like to say that the special flavor of this tea is from the saliva of the insects. We all know that that's not true now. We have science behind it. It's an immune system in the tea plant, an immune system response in the tea plant, which creates this chemical compound, which in the end produces a very distinct honey-like character in the flavor profile of the tea. Actually, bug-bitten tea has a fairly broad spectrum of flavors, you might say. It's not always the same by any means, and it's not just one insect that causes this immune system response in the tea plants. So it's very complex. It varies from one corner of a single plot of tea to another, no less from one plot of tea to another, and then of course from season to season. Having said all that, for the last few years we've been sourcing our Concubine Oolong tea from a farm in Taihe in Meishan Township in Jiayi County, part of the Alishan High Mountain tea growing region. And this farmer, due to his farming practices, he's not an organic farmer, but he does minimally use pesticides. And his spring crop basically has been consistently producing a bug-bitten flavor for a few years in a row. And our mentor Lisa, who we actually introduced this farmer to, and Lisa has been buying from him fairly consistently, has bought significant amounts of his produce and roasted it to her perceived, where she thinks it's reached its optimal flavor profile, and then in turn we source it from Lisa. This year, the spring growing season was unusual, to say the least. We were still in the throes of a year-long drought. Particularly that region was affected the most. Any farms that did not have irrigation basically didn't produce a spring crop. So she didn't source from that farmer this year, but she has sourced prior to and intermittently from another friend in Lugu, where she lives, from the Shanlinshi High Mountain tea growing region, and found that the second flush of, which was a more standard produce, you might say. Rains had started. The tea plants were very happy to be producing new leaves based on that rain, and often, more commonly, high mountain tea farmers will, after the spring harvest, they'll kind of just be lazy, so to speak, more or less, depending on their year-long plan of when they're going to prune the trees back for the next harvest. Often what happens is the second flush is allowed to grow without pesticide use, and that is what occurred in the later half of the growing season for this crop of tea. And Lisa once again sourced from her friend in Lugu. So Alishan is a bit warmer, a lot more sunshine, and Shanlinshi is cooler with a lot more fog, typically, in a general sense. So those are the differences in the regions. The batches of tea themselves, let's take a quick look at the dried leaves. So this is over a year old, the spring 2020 batch, obviously. And the leaves are very nice. They're uniform. They're rolled nicely. Most of the stems are on the outside of the leaves, so there was care taken in the rolling. Not too much of the compacting machine was used. A little bit light in color. Possibly could be revealing some maturity in the leaves. Also, much more likely, now that I say that, is that the leaves were yellowed by the effect of being bitten by bugs. That's what happens when there's a significant amount of, when the leaves are basically damaged and their growth is stunted. They just grow not very beautifully. And that's the original name of bug-bitten tea. Prior to Oriental Beauty in Hsinchu County, it was called Pongfong Cha, which was braggart's tea. And somebody, a smart person, a farmer, thought that regardless of how his tea leaves looked, he thought it was really good stuff. And now we all know that he was right. He was just one of the early unorthodox people that went out of the conventional standards at that time. So that's what the 2020 batch looks like. Looks like it was obviously bug bitten. The 2021 batch is much more standard. It's darker, very uniform in color, and we'll have a look at the, you actually see some yellowing, spotting of yellowing here, but much more of a something similar to a Dongding Oolong. I should mention that Concubine Oolong tea is a derivative in a certain sense of Dongding Oolong tea, particularly in the processing methods. It is made in the same fashion as Dongding Oolong. Given that the leaves are bug-bitten and toughened to an extent, they are often more heavily processed, basically more shuffled and tumbled in order to produce a more even and thorough oxidation effect. So Concubine is, in general, a little more oxidized than the modern style of Dongding Oolong, at least. And then it's often not roasted, it's almost always not roasted as much as Dongding Oolong. So the roasting factor, we've learned, has a pretty large spectrum. People roast their bug-bitten tea leaves to the extent where they feel the flavor is most prominent. And if you roast them too much, that honey-esque character can disappear. So it's a very tricky and unpredictable process with each unique batch of bug-bitten leaves. They are unique by definition in that the growing conditions and the response from the plants are always different, even within one batch of tea, from leaf to leaf. That is actually the case. Okay, lots of talking, no drinking. Let's quickly get into it here. I'm gonna have, I brewed 7 grams of tea leaves for 2 minutes first, and then about 90 seconds on the second brew. We can see that the spring 2020 is way lighter. So it looks like it was roasted significantly less. That's the most obvious perception that I can conclude from the difference in coloration. Really nice, definitely a honey aspect to it, floral, and a little bit of pastry. Very soft, soothing, quite delicious. So I grew up in Dongding Oolong tea country in my tea experience here in Taiwan. I'm most familiar with Dongding Oolong tea. Overall, I just had, that's the amount of time I've spent in the Lugu region far surpasses any other tea growing region. And so this is close to heart, you might say. It's really good. It's a little bit more piney, like a dongding can be. It's definitely got a bug bitten aspect to it. Yeah, more of an alpine forest thing going on with this, just a honey note within that. It reminds me of a roasted Shanlishi High Mountain Oolong tea with a very complex bouquet, you might say. After the finish, my mouth is just puckering. It's got a tangy finish, fruity. It's got some fruit wood or pine wood aspects to it. Sweetness, like Bartlett pears or apples. You know, not your plum or your peach. It's more of a temperate climate fruit. Okay, I want to check out the brewed leaves here. So again, these leaves, the 2020 obviously has a lot of time to mellow. This, on the other hand, has a freshly roasted character. If you're into roasted tea, I would call this verging on medium roast. Not quite as much as a dongding, but it's a little bit beyond what we have classified Concubine in general as being a light roast tea. I think Lisa felt like these leaves could be pushed a little more and went for a heartier roast character. And we can see that in the coloration of the tea as well. So yeah, the leaves themselves show a similar story. The 2020 leaves are lighter, greener, more of that yellowing bug bitten thing going on, but less processed, more of the original composition. The new batch looks more roasted, and it also looks a bit younger. It looks like less mature leaves. So I would say that the new batch is more oxidized, definitely more roasted, more akin to what you find in the Lugu Farmers Association Dongding Oolong tea competition, which is higher elevations within the Lugu Township area and then even further up into the Shanlinshi High Mountain Oolong tea growing region. Yeah, this is a bug-bitten tea that has, it's not very obviously honey-esque. There's just an added flavor, not just a note, but almost like a spectrum within itself, a flavor factor that gives it a little bit more punch, a little bit more robustness, and interesting. It's something a little bit beyond your standard Dongding Oolong flavor. That's what we have going for our new batch of High Mountain Concubine Oolong tea from the Shanlinshi High Mountain Oolong tea growing region. We're pretty excited. It's a little bit more close to home than the previous batches, which are kind of lighter, more floral, more honey-esque too. This is close to a Lugu style oolong tea. So if you're into that kind of light medium roast category and a robust oolong, you might find this tea quite interesting. You can go to our website, ecocha.com, click on the roasted oolong tab, and you will find High Mountain Concubine Oolong at the top of the page. Thanks for listening.